Hi, and thanks for joining me. I'm going to tell you a little story today about how a couple of books brought back my joy of reading at a time where I didn't think that was possible. So years and years ago, I became a school librarian, and I had a year working in a school that made me quite ill. And so after that first year, I had to take some time off because it had really caused me problems with my mental health. And in that time, I lost my ability to read. I couldn't concentrate on reading. I lost the love of reading. And when the thing that you absolutely love and the thing that relaxes you the most is taken away from you, it causes so many problems. It absolutely made a bad situation even worse. It took me a long time to begin reading again, and it was a really, really slow process. I tried so many times to pick up a novel and start again, or pick up a magazine. I was just flicking, no sense of joy whatsoever. But very, very slowly, I realised that, and this was after a long time and receiving some help for the situation that I'd found myself in. I slowly realised that I wouldn't be able to read in the same way that I've always read. I've nearly always read novels, and that has been my go-to form of reading. And I one day happened to look through my bookcase, and I found a couple of books that I had purchased years before. They were from the Folio Society. Now, anybody who knows about the Folio Society knows that they are beautiful versions of books and really expensive. The only reason I bought them was because they had this fantastic offer for somebody who wanted to start purchasing from them, and I bought very few books from them over a few years, but the two that I'd purchased to start with were the two that caught my eye as I was just flicking through my bookcase, and they weren't the usual books that I read. One was a book of short stories, and one was a collected works of a particular author. And it wasn't just stories, it was poems and little sayings. I thought, okay, I'll start with something that's quick, that's easy, that I might be able to just pick up and put down really, really quickly. And if I feel like I've got a little bit of concentration, I can have a read, and then I can put it away and not feel as though I have to keep reading because I'll lose the plot otherwise. And so that first book that I started with was this one, and it is The Best of Dorothy Parker. I'd heard about Dorothy Parker before reading the book, but didn't know much about her. I knew that she was quite a witty writer. She was American, quite a witty writer in the earlier part of the 20th century. And the one thing that I knew about her was she was the writer quoted with saying, "Men rarely wear passes at girls who wear glasses." So that was it. That's all I knew about her. And so I picked up the book, opened it, had a little read, put it down, thought, okay, I've managed a little piece of written work. And then a few days later, picked it up again, read another little something, put it down. And I did this a few times. And because everything was so short, it helped. It gave me a sense of achievement when I've read it. It gave me just that little opportunity to do something that I hadn't done for so long, and that was read. And it was to read something in a complete way as well, and not just flick through and put it down. And so reading some of her works started to build up. It's almost like a muscle. You know, I'd lost the power to read, and very, very slowly reading some of these books some of these articles and poems that she'd written, I started to build that muscle again. I started to build the desire as well. You know, I'd completely lost that desire. I started to build that. Now, bearing in mind that my whole career has been built around books and reading and literature and sharing my love of this with others, I thought I was going to have to change careers. And I do really think that if I hadn't have found a way to start to read again, I would have had to have changed careers, because I could not be a competent librarian without being able to read. It wouldn't have happened. And so this book very, very slowly inched me back into a recovery, a reading recovery. And then the other book that I picked up was something that I was really aware of. It was an author that I was aware of. It was a character I was aware of. I'll just show you the cover of this book. And this is Miss Marple stories. So Agatha Christie's Miss Marple. I have always loved detective fiction. I've got such a soft spot for anything written by Agatha Christie, but I love Miss Marple as well. I love her wit and I love her character and I love her knowledge. And so once I'd started back on the road to reading, I started to pick up this book and read a story. And I would just give myself one story, and I didn't even have to read it in one go, but I read it and I felt a sense of completion, and then I'd move on to another one. It gave me such joy to read these books, or both of these, because they were so different to what I'd usually read. If I read an Agatha Christie story, it was in a novel. It was a full novel. And I didn't even realise that she'd written short stories, particularly not about Miss Marple. And it just felt as though it was a comfort. I knew the character. I wasn't struggling to understand who she was. I knew her. I knew the environment that she lived in. I knew her little character foibles. And so it was a comfort. And it was a way for me to feel safe when I was reading. There was nothing new except for the length of the story that I was reading. And looking back now, I needed the break from the norm for me. It almost restarted a part of my brain that had just given up the ghost, really. It gave it a kickstart. And I think both of these books helped in two very different ways. Dorothy Parker's wit and her acid and the bile that she uses when she reads. At that point, I was so introverted and I was so unsure of myself. And reading about this strong, powerful idea that, you know, you could be nasty, you could be a strong, scary individual. I needed that. I needed to know that I could be stronger, and I needed somebody to show me the way. And I think Dorothy Parker showed me the way at that point. She really did give me a different mindset to work through what I was working through, and to then go back to a job that had made me poorly. And I stayed there in total 9 years. I think I needed that strength. I needed to find it from somewhere, and I could borrow it from her. I could borrow it from her words. And so that was one half of the healing process. But the other half was, as I've said, with Miss Marple, a character that I knew, a character that I loved, but also a character who was really underplayed, really seen as unimportant and hidden. And she could be in a room full of people and nobody would notice her. That's one of her powers. She can sit in a room and she can see exactly what's going on. She's ignored, she's overlooked. But that means that people will talk and she will hear things and she will see things. And rereading some of these stories now, years later, It makes me feel as though that's almost every woman in middle age and beyond. We're seen as a little bit insignificant by some people. We can sit in a room and we can be overlooked. But I think more fool the person who does overlook a middle-aged and older woman, because we have the instincts, we have the knowledge, we have the acerbic tongue. We really can see a situation and deal with it. We are very powerful, but underestimated. And I think that that's a little bit of our power as well. If you underestimate someone, then they can really, really show their true colours and shock the room, shock all those who have dared to overlook them, and get so much more out of any situation. And so looking at Miss Marple now, I see her as not just a gentle older lady, I see her as an absolute powerhouse who utilises this idea that other people have about her to her benefit and to their detriment. And I absolutely love that about her as a character. And so I work with lots and lots of people within my role, and use books, use poetry in particular, as a way to help people heal. It's something that I love to do. You know, I will go onto one of the wards at the hospital where I work and read poems, and the poems are just a starting point. They start a conversation, and then we can talk about thoughts and impressions that are raised through that poem, but then we talk about everything else that comes from that conversation. It builds community, it builds a safe space, and I know the power of words because I have lived through the use of words to help me come back to the person that I have always been. And it just astounds me how powerful and healing books, poems, song lyrics, anything with words, how powerful they can be. And that's another reason why I wanted to share these two with you. I really felt the benefit from reading these, and so I thought what I'd do is just read a few passages from Dorothy Parker, but also I'm going to read you the first story in the Miss Marple book as well. So let me just find, I've read through this recently to find something that rang true. And there's a lot actually when I've reread it, there's a lot that I'd think now, I'm not sure why I thought it was really as good as I did. But then I'd come across one of the poems or one of the pieces that she'd written, and I'd go, oh, that's why. I didn't need each and everything to be wonderful and to set me on the right path. I just needed the odd thing here and there. So one of them was called Indian Summer. In youth it was a way I had to do my best to please and change with every passing lad to suit his theories. But now I know the things I know and do the things I do. And if you do not like me so, to hell my love with you. I love that because it really does take age to be able to do that, doesn't it? And another one perfect rose. A single flower he sent me since we met, all tenderly his messenger he chose, deep-hearted, pure, with scented dew still wet, one perfect rose. I knew the language of the floweret, my fragile leaves, it said, his heart enclose. Long, long has taken for his amulet, one perfect rose. Why is it no one ever sent me yet? One perfect limousine, do you suppose? Ah, no, it's always just my luck to get one perfect rose. She gets in there with that snarky comment. So the final thing I'm going to read you from this book is Inventory. For be the things I am wiser to know, idleness, sorrow, a friend and a foe. 4 be the things I'd better without, love, curiosity, freckles and doubt. 3 be the things I shall never attain, envy, content and sufficient champagne. 3 be the things I shall have till I die, laughter and hope and a sock in the eye. I love this. There are so many within this book, but they are the ones that just now hit home. If I read it again in another month, I'll probably choose others. And that's the beauty of reading. You can read the same thing again and again, and every time you read it, you get a different feeling from it because you're living a different life than the first time you read it. And so I will read the first story in the Miss Marple short stories, and it's called The Thursday Night Club. Unsolved mysteries. Raymond West blew out a cloud of smoke and repeated the words with a kind of deliberate self-conscious pleasure. Unsolved mysteries. He looked round him with satisfaction. The room was an old one with broad black beams across the ceiling, and it was furnished with good old furniture that belonged to it. Hence Raymond West's approving glance. By profession he was a writer, and he liked the atmosphere to be flawless. His Aunt Jane's house always pleased him as the right setting for her personality. He looked across the hearth to where she sat erect in the big grandfather chair. Miss Marple wore a black brocade dress very much pinched in around the waist. Mechlin lace was arranged in a cascade down the front of the bodice. She had on black lace mittens and a black lace cap surmounted with the piled up masses of her snowy hair. She was knitting, something white and soft and fleecy. Her faded blue eyes, benignant and kindly, surveyed her nephew and her nephew's guests with gentle pleasure. They rested first on Raymond himself, self-consciously debonair, then on Joyce Lempriere, the artist, with her close-cropped black head and queer hazel green eyes, then on that well-groomed man of the world, Sir Henry Clithering. There were 2 other people in the room, Dr. Pender, the elderly clergyman of the parish, and Mr. Petherick, the solicitor, a dried-up little man with eyeglasses, which he looked over and not through. Miss Marple gave a brief moment of attention to all these people and returned to her knitting with a gentle smile upon her lips. Mr. Petherick gave the dry little cough which he usually prefaced his remarks. "What is that you say, Raymond? Unsolved mysteries? Huh, and what about them?" "Nothing about them," said Joyce Lempriere. "Raymond just likes the sound of the words and of himself saying them." Raymond West threw her a glance of reproach, at which she threw back her head and laughed. "Oh, he is a humbug, isn't he, Miss Marple?" she demanded. "You know that, I'm sure." Miss Marple smiled gently at her but made no reply. "Life itself is an unsolved mystery," said the clergyman gravely. Raymond sat up in his chair and flung away his cigarette with an impulsive gesture. "That's not what I mean. I was not talking philosophy," he said. "I was thinking of actual, bare, prosaic facts, things that have happened and that no one has ever explained." "I know just the sort of thing you mean, dear," said Miss Marple. "For instance, Mrs. Carruthers had a very strange experience yesterday morning. She bought 2 gills of pickled shrimps at Elliott's. She called at 2 other shops, and when she got home she found she had not got the shrimps with her. She went back to the 2 shops she had visited, but these shrimps had completely disappeared. Now that seems to me very remarkable." "A very fishy story," said Mr. Clithering gravely. "There are, of course, all kinds of possible explanations," said Miss Marple, her cheeks growing slightly pinker with excitement. "For instance, somebody else—" "My dear aunt," said Raymond West with some amusement, "I didn't mean that sort of village incident. I was thinking of murders and disappearances, the kind of thing that Sir Henry could tell us about by the hour if he liked." "But I never talk shop," said Sir Henry modestly. "No, I never talk shop." Sir Henry Clithering had been, until lately, Commissioner of Scotland Yard. "I suppose there are a lot of murders and things that never are solved by the police," said Joyce Lempriere. "That is an admitted fact, I believe," said Mr. Petherick. "I wonder," said Raymond West, What class of brain really succeeds best in unravelling a mystery? One always feels that the average police detective must be hampered by a lack of imagination. That is the layman's point of view, said Sir Henry dryly. You really want a committee, said Joyce, smiling. For psychology and imagination, go to the writer. She made an ironical bow to Raymond, but he remained serious. The art of writing gives one an insight into human nature, he said gravely. One sees, perhaps, motives that the ordinary person would pass by. I know, dear, said Miss Marple, that your books are very clever. But do you think that people are really so unpleasant as to make them out as you make them out to be? My dear aunt, said Raymond gently, keep your beliefs, heaven forbid that I should say in any way shatter them. I mean, said Miss Marple, puckering her brow a little as she counted the stitches in her knitting, that so many people seem to me not to be either good or bad, but simply, very silly. Mr. Pretherick gave his dry little cough again. Don't you think, Raymond, he said, that you attach too much weight to imagination? Imagination is a very dangerous thing, as we lawyers know only too well. To be able to sift evidence impartially, to take the facts and look at them as facts, that seems to me the only logical method of arranging at any truth. I may add that in my experience it is the only one that succeeds. Bah! Cried Joyce, flinging back her black head indignantly. I bet I could beat you all at this game. I am not only a woman, and say what you like, women have an intuition that is denied to men. I am an artist as well. I see things that you don't, and then, too, as an artist, I have knocked about among all sorts and conditions of people. I know life as darling Miss Marple here could not possibly know it. Oh, don't know about that, dear, said Miss Marple. Very painful and distressing things happen in villages sometimes. May I speak? Said Dr. Pender, smiling. It is the fashion nowadays to decry the clergy. I know, but we hear things. We know a side of human character which is a sealed book to the outside world. Well, said Joyce, it seems to me we are a pretty representative gathering. How would it be if we formed a club? What is today? Tuesday. We will call it the Tuesday Night Club. It is to meet every week, and each member in turn has to propound a problem, some mystery of which they have personal knowledge and to which, of course, they know the answer. Let me see, how many are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We ought really to be 6. You've forgotten me, dear, said Miss Marple, smiling brightly. Joyce was slightly taken aback, but she concealed the fact quickly. That would be lovely, Miss Marple, she said. I didn't think you'd care to play. I think it would be very interesting, said Miss Marple, especially with so many clever gentlemen present. I'm afraid I'm not clever myself, but living all these years in St. Mary Mead does give one an insight into human nature. I am sure your cooperation will be very valuable, said Sir Henry courteously. Who's going to start? Said Joyce. I think there is no doubt as to that, said Dr. Pender, when we have the great fortune to have such a distinguished man as Sir Henry staying with us. He left his sentence unfinished, making a courtly bow in the direction of Sir Henry. The latter was silent for a minute or two. At last he sighed and recrossed his legs and began. It's a little difficult for me to select just the kind of thing you want, but I think, as it happens, I know of an instance which fits these conditions very aptly. You may have seen some mention of the case in the papers of a year ago. It was laid aside at the time as an unsolved mystery, but as it happens, a solution came into my hands not very many days ago. The facts are very simple. 3 people sat down to a supper consisting, amongst other things, a tin of lobster. Later in the night, all 3 were taken ill and a doctor was hastily summoned. 2 of the people recovered, the 3rd one died. Ah, said Raymond approvingly. As I said, the facts as such were very simple. Death was considered to be due to ptomaine poisoning. A certificate was given to the effect and the victim was duly buried. But things did not rest at that. Miss Marple nodded her head. "There was talk, I suppose," she said. "There usually is. And now I must describe the actors in this little drama. I will call the husband and wife Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and the wife's companion Miss Clark. Mr. Jones was a traveller for a firm of manufacturing chemists. He was a good-looking man in a kind of coarse, florid way, aged around 50. His wife was a rather commonplace woman of about 45. The companion, Miss Clark, was a woman of 60, a stout, cheery woman with a beaming, rubicund face. None of them, you might say, very interesting. Now the beginning of the troubles arose in a very curious way. Mr. Jones had been staying the previous night at a small commercial hotel in Birmingham. It happened that the blotting paper in the blotting book had been put in fresh that day, and the chambermaid, having apparently nothing better to do, amused herself by studying the blotter in the mirror after Mr. Jones had been writing a letter there. A few days later there was a report in the papers of the death of Mrs. Jones as the result of eating tinned lobster, and the chambermaid then imparted to her fellow servants the words that she had deciphered on the blotting pad. They were as follows: "Entirely dependent on my wife. When she is dead, I will. Hundreds and thousands." You may remember that there had recently been a case of a wife being poisoned by her husband. It needed very little fire to fire the imagination of these maids. Mr. Jones had planned to do away with his wife and inherit hundreds of thousands of pounds. As it happened, one of the maids had relatives living in the small market town where the Joneses resided. She wrote to them and they returned a note to her. Mr. Jones, it seems, had been very attentive to the local doctor's daughter, a good-looking young woman of 33. Scandal began to hum. The Home Secretary was petitioned. Numerous anonymous letters poured into Scotland Yard, all accusing Mr. Jones of having murdered his wife. Now, I may say that not for one moment did we think there was anything in it except idle village talk and gossip. Nevertheless, to quiet public opinion, an exhumation order was granted. It was one of those cases of popular superstition based on nothing solid whatever, which proved to be so surprisingly justified. As a result of the autopsy, sufficient arsenic was found to make it quite clear that the deceased lady had died of arsenic poisoning. It was for Scotland Yard working with the local authorities to prove how the arsenic had been administered and by whom. "Ah," said Joyce, "I like this. This is the real stuff." Suspicion naturally fell on the husband. He benefited from his wife's death. Not to the extent of hundreds of thousands romantically imagined by the hotel chambermaid, but to the very solid amount of £8,000. He had no money of his own apart from what he earned, and he was a man of some extravagant habits with a partiality for the society of women. We investigated as delicately as possible the rumour of his attachment to the doctor's daughter, but while it seemed clear that there had been a strong friendship between them at the time, there had been a most abrupt break 2 months previously, and they did not appear to have seen each other since. The doctor himself, an elderly man of a straightforward and unsuspicious type, was dumbfounded at the result of the autopsy. He had been called in about midnight to find all 3 people suffering. He had realised immediately the seriousness of the condition of Mrs. Jones and had sent back to his dispensary for some opium pills to allay the pain. In spite of all his efforts, however, she succumbed, but not for a moment did he suspect that anything was amiss. He was convinced that her death was due to a form of botulism. Supper that night had consisted of tinned lobster and salad, trifle and bread and cheese. Unfortunately, none of the lobster remained. It had all been eaten and the tin thrown away. He had interrogated the young maid Gladys Lynch. She was terribly upset, very tearful and agitated, and he found it hard to get her to keep to the point. But she declared again and again that the tin had not been distended in any way and that the lobster had appeared to her in a perfectly good condition. Such were the facts we had to go upon. If Jones had feloniously administered arsenic to his wife, it seemed clear that it could not have been done in any of the things eaten at supper, as all 3 persons had partaken of the meal. Also, another point, Jones himself had returned from Birmingham just as supper was being brought into the table, so that he would have had no opportunity of doctoring any of the food beforehand. "What about the companion?" asked Joyce. "The stout woman with the good-humoured face?" Sir Henry nodded. "We did not neglect Miss Clark, I can assure you, but it seemed doubtful what motive she could have had for the crime. Mrs. Jones left her no legacy of any kind, and the net result of her employer's death was that she'd had to seek for another situation." "That seems to leave her out of it," said Joyce thoughtfully. "Now, one of my inspectors soon discovered a significant fact," went on Sir Henry. "After supper on that evening, Mr. Jones had gone down to the kitchen and had demanded a bowl of cornflour for his wife, who had complained of not feeling well. He'd waited in the kitchen until Gladys Lynch prepared it and then carried it up to his wife's room himself. That, I admit, seemed to clinch the case." The lawyer nodded. "Motive," he said, ticking off one of his fingers. "Opportunity. As a traveller for a firm of druggists, easy access to poison." "And a man of weak moral fibre," said the clergyman. Raymond West was staring at Sir Henry. "There's a catch in this somewhere," he said. "Why did you not arrest him?" Sir Henry smiled rather wryly. "That is the unfortunate part of the case. So far all had gone swimmingly, but now we come to the snags. Jones was not arrested because in interrogating Miss Clark, she told us that the bowl of cornflour was drunk not by Mrs. Jones, but by her. Yes, it seems that she went to Mrs. Jones' room, as was her custom. Mrs. Jones was sitting up in bed and the bowl of cornflour was beside her. 'I'm not feeling a bit well, Milly,' she said. 'Serves me right, I suppose, for touching lobster at night. I asked Albert to get me a bowl of cornflour, but now that I have it, I don't seem to fancy it.' 'A pity,' commented Miss Clark. 'It's made nicely too. No lumps. Gladys is really quite a good cook. Very few girls nowadays seem to be able to make up a bowl of cornflour nicely. I declare I quite fancy it myself. I'm that hungry.' 'I should think you were with your foolish ways,' said Mrs. Jones. I must explain," broke off Sir Henry, "that Miss Clark, alarmed at her increasing stoutness, was doing a course of what is popularly known as banting." "It is not good for you, Milly, it really isn't," urged Mrs. Jones. "If the Lord made you stout, he made you to be stout. You drink up that bowl of cornflour. It will do you all the good in the world." And straight away Miss Clark set to and did in actual fact finish the bowl. So you see, that knocked out our case against the husband to pieces. Asked for an explanation for the words on the blotting book, Jones gave one readily enough. The letter, he explained, was in answer to one written from his brother in Australia, who had applied to him for money. He had written pointing out that he was entirely dependent on his wife. When his wife was dead, he would have control of money and would assist his brother if possible. He regretted his inability to help, but pointed out that there were hundreds and thousands of people in the world in the same unfortunate plight. "And so the case fell to pieces?" said Dr. Pender. "And so the case fell to pieces," said Sir Henry gravely. "We could not take the risk of arresting Jones with nothing to go on." There was silence, and then Joyce said, "And that is all, is it?" "That is the case as it stood for the last year. The true solution is now in the hands of Scotland Yard, and in 2 or 3 days' time you will probably read of it in the newspapers." "The true solution," said Joyce thoughtfully. "I wonder. Let's all think for 5 minutes and then speak." Raymond West nodded and noted the time on his watch. When the 5 minutes were up, he looked over at Dr. Pinder. "Will you speak first?" he said. The old man shook his head. "I confess," he said, "that I am utterly baffled. I can but think that the husband in some way must be the guilty party, but how he did it, I can't imagine. I can only suggest that he must have given her the poison in some way that has not yet been discovered, although how in that case it should have come to light after all this time, I cannot imagine." "Joyce?" "The companion," said Joyce decidedly. "The companion every time. How do we know what motive she may have had? Just because she was old and stout and ugly, it doesn't follow that she wasn't in love with Jones herself. She may have hated the wife for some other reason. Think of being a companion, always having to be pleasant and agree and stifle yourself and bottle yourself up. One day she couldn't bear it any longer, and then she killed her. She probably put the arsenic in the bowl of cornflour, and all that story about eating itself is a lie. Mr. Petherick?" The lawyer joined the tips of his fingers together professionally. I should hardly like to say. On the facts, I should hardly like to say. But you've got to, Mr. Petherick, said Joyce. You can't reserve judgment and say without prejudice and be legal. You've got to play the game. On the facts, said Mr. Petherick, there seems nothing to be said. It's my private opinion, having seen, alas, too many cases of this kind, that the husband was guilty. The only explanation that will cover the facts seems to be that Miss Clark, for some reason or other, deliberately sheltered him. There may have been some financial agreement made between them. He might realise that he would be suspected, and she, seeing only a future of poverty before her, may have agreed to tell the story of drinking the cornflower in return for a substantial sum to be paid to her privately. If that was the case, it was, of course, most irregular indeed. I disagree with you all, said Raymond. You've forgotten the one important factor in the case, the doctor's daughter. I will give you my reading of the case. The tinned lobster was bad. It accounted for the poisoning symptoms. The doctor was sent for. He finds Mrs. Jones, who has eaten more lobster than the others, in great pain, and he sends, as you told us, for some opium pills. He does not go himself, he sends. Who will give the messenger the opium pills? Clearly his daughter. Very likely she dispenses his medicines for him. She's in love with Jones, and at this moment all the worst instincts in her nature rise, and she realises that the means to procure his freedom are in her hands. The pills that she sent contain pure white arsenic. That's my solution. And now, Sir Henry, tell us, said Joyce eagerly. One moment, said Sir Henry. Miss Marple has not yet spoken. Miss Marple was shaking her head sadly.